Elias was the first person to notice that something had changed about me. Not because I told him, not because I made some dramatic announcement, but because I simply stopped asking. For years, I had built my life around his opinions. I would send him pictures of dresses before a dinner, ask him which shoes looked better, show him my lunch and worry whether the calories would ruin my progress. This one or this one? I would text. Do you think this sauce is too unhealthy? And he used to answer patiently. At least in the beginning. But over time, his replies became shorter and colder. Either is fine. Whatever you want. Sometimes he would read my messages and never respond at all. I convinced myself he was exhausted. He was a surgeon, after all. His schedule was brutal, his responsibilities were enormous, and I thought loving someone meant understanding their silence. I told myself I was being supportive. I told myself I was lucky to have a man so dedicated to his career. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't too busy for everyone. He was only too busy for me. A position opened at the New York branch of my company, and the opportunity was exactly what I had dreamed about for years. When the email arrived asking if I wanted to apply, I stared at the screen for a long time. In the past, I would have immediately called Elias. I would have asked what he thought, whether moving was realistic, whether it would affect our relationship. I would have brought him every detail and waited for his approval before making a decision. But this time, I simply opened the application, filled out every section, and clicked submit. Only afterward did I realize I hadn't mentioned it to him at all. And strangely, I didn't feel guilty. I just felt calm. That feeling was new. When Sarah's wedding invitation arrived, it was addressed to me with a guest included. I smiled, RSVP'd for myself only, and wrote a separate check for their gift. Another small thing I would have discussed with Elias before. Another decision I made alone. Then came the surgery. It wasn't life-threatening, but it required a hospital stay and careful recovery. I found the specialist myself, contacted the insurance company, handled the paperwork, and scheduled the procedure. I didn't tell Elias until everything was already arranged. Maybe a part of me wanted to see if he would notice. Maybe I wanted proof that I still mattered. When he finally found out, his expression immediately changed. "You're having surgery?" he asked, his eyebrows pulling together. "Why didn't you tell me?" The answer came out before I could soften it. "I handled it." "Don't worry." The moment those words left my mouth, we both froze. Because we both knew exactly what they meant. Just a few weeks earlier, I was the woman who depended on him for everything. The girlfriend who called him over a tiny cut on her finger because she wanted reassurance. The woman who sent him 10 outfit choices before a date because she couldn't decide without him. Now I was standing there calmly telling a surgeon that I had arranged my own medical procedure. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Elias had always told me I needed to be more independent. "You're an adult, Chloe. You can make your own decisions," he used to say whenever I asked for help. I believed him. I tried to become the person he claimed he wanted. But then Lily appeared, and I discovered that independence was only something he wanted from me. Lily was the daughter of Elias's late mentor. After her father passed away, Elias's family asked him to look after her. She was younger, emotionally fragile, and according to Elias, struggling with severe anxiety. I wanted to be understanding. I really did. I thought he was just being compassionate. But slowly, I started noticing things that hurt more than I wanted to admit. He ignored my messages but answered hers instantly. He was too tired to drive me to the airport, but if Lily called at 3 in the morning because she was scared, he would immediately put on his coat and leave. He said she needed him. He said she was vulnerable. He said I was being selfish for feeling hurt. The day before my surgery, I went to the hospital alone. I sat in the waiting area, completed the final paperwork, and listened as the nurse explained that Dr. Mercer was still away at a medical conference. If you want to wait for him, we can reschedule, she said. No, I replied quietly. It's fine. Let's continue. I had spent years waiting for Elias to make time for me. I wasn't waiting anymore. When I walked out of the office, I saw two familiar faces coming down the hallway. Elias was there, pulling a suitcase behind him. He looked like he had just arrived from the airport. Beside him was Lily, wearing a black cashmere coat. My coat. The one I had bought Elias for our anniversary because I knew he liked that brand. He saw me and immediately frowned. What are you doing here? He asked. Are you sick again? The word again hurt more than I expected. He took the medical documents from my hand and scanned them quickly. His expression changed from surprise to irritation. I have things scheduled tomorrow. This isn't urgent. We can do it when I'm available. I looked at him. The old me would have been devastated. I would have cried, asked why I wasn't important enough, begged him to stay. But the woman standing there was different. Don't worry, I said. It's already handled. Elias stared at me as if he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Because the person in front of him was no longer the woman who needed constant reassurance. I turned to leave and accidentally knocked a small box from his hand. It hit the floor and opened. Inside were birth control pills. For a second, nobody moved. Elias immediately bent down to pick them up. It's not what you think, he said calmly. They're for Lily. Her doctor prescribed them because of her cramps. Lily pulled his coat closer around herself, looking uncomfortable. Then she spoke softly. I'm sorry, Chloe. This is all my fault. I didn't answer. I already knew where this conversation was going. It was always the same. My anxiety has been terrible lately, Lily continued. I can't sleep. I can't focus. Elias is the only person who understands. He said he couldn't leave me alone because he was worried I might do something dangerous. She lowered her eyes dramatically. I wish I was as strong as you. I almost laughed. I had heard those words before. Every time I questioned how close they were, Lily became fragile and Elias became my protector's enemy. He would look at me like I was cruel for wanting basic attention from my own boyfriend. Once, when I had severe stomach pain, I asked Elias which doctor I should see. He was one of the smartest surgeons I knew. I expected him to help. Instead, he sighed and said, I don't know. Look it up yourself. When I told him, he sounded dismissive. He rubbed his forehead and replied, Chloe, you're an adult. Stop relying on me for every little thing. But when Lily needed medical appointments, he personally walked her through every step. He introduced her to his colleagues. He guided her career. He protected her feelings. Meanwhile, I was learning how to stop needing him. I looked at Lily and then at Elias. You should take good care of her, I said quietly. After all, her problems seem much more important than mine. Lily's face immediately changed. Chloe, that's not what I meant. Elias interrupted her and looked directly at me. Are you still angry because I didn't tell you I was traveling? 2 weeks earlier, it had been his birthday. I had spent weeks arranging my schedule so I could surprise him. I cooked his favorite meal, bought the watch he had wanted, and waited at home until midnight. He never came. I only discovered where he was because I saw Lily's social media story. Elias had been in London for a conference. It was just work, he had told me afterward. I don't need to report every detail of my life to you. That sentence had stayed with me. Because I realized he didn't want a partner who cared. He wanted someone who expected nothing. Birthdays happen every year, he had said. This was important for my career. Don't you have your own life? That night, I finally asked the question I had been afraid to say. Elias, am I always going to be the last person you choose? He didn't answer. He just told me I was being emotional and promised we would talk when he returned. But we never really did. Because I finally understood something. I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking the wrong person. And as I walked away from the hospital that day, carrying my own medical papers and my own future plans, I made a decision. After the surgery, after New York, after everything was finished, Elias Mercer would no longer be the center of my world. He had taught me how to live without depending on him. He just never expected me to actually learn. The strangest thing about leaving someone is that the decision often happens long before the actual goodbye. By the time I walked out of that hospital hallway, I had already started saying goodbye to Elias in my mind. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger still meant I cared enough to fight. What I felt was something quieter. Something colder. I had spent years trying to convince myself that his distance was just his personality, that his silence was simply the burden of being a successful surgeon, that his lack of attention didn't mean a lack of love. But watching him show patience and tenderness to Lily destroyed every excuse I had created for him. The truth was painfully simple. Elias knew how to care. He just stopped choosing to care for me. After my surgery, Sarah immediately took time off work and insisted on staying with me during my recovery. She was the kind of friend who didn't need explanations. She just showed up. "Is the guest room ready?" she texted me. "Your 5-star private nurse is arriving soon." I laughed when I read it. I cleaned it twice. I even bought new sheets. I was typing another joke when I opened the door to my apartment and stopped. The guest room looked nothing like it had before. The fresh sheets I had prepared for Sarah were crumpled on the floor. A huge stuffed bear was lying across the bed. The nightstand was covered with skincare products, medicine bottles, and random belongings that clearly weren't mine. Then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A silk pajama top was hanging over the chair. It was the one I had bought myself for my birthday the previous year. The tags were still attached because I had never found the right occasion to wear it. Now there was a dark coffee stain across the fabric. Before I could process what I was seeing, the front door opened. I heard Lily's voice first. "Elias, thank you for taking me there. The pasta was amazing. And the dessert really helped my mood." Then they walked in. Elias froze when he saw me standing there. For a moment, nobody spoke. "Lily had a fight with her roommate," he finally explained. His voice was calm, almost defensive. "She's been unstable lately. I was worried about leaving her alone. She's staying here temporarily until she finds another place." I stared at him. "Elias, I told you a week ago that Sarah was coming to stay with me." His expression changed. Just slightly. But enough. He had forgotten. Completely forgotten. The same man who remembered every detail of Lily's problems had forgotten that his own girlfriend had a guest arriving. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. Then he lifted the takeout bag in his hand. "I brought dinner. It's from that new restaurant you wanted to try. I'll take you there this weekend." I looked down at the logo on the bag. It was the exact Italian restaurant I had begged him to visit for months. Every time I suggested it, he said he was too busy. "Maybe later." "I'm exhausted." Another time. But apparently another time had arrived when Lily wanted pasta. I took the bag from his hand and dropped it into the trash. Elias's face immediately hardened. "Chloe." Lily stepped forward with tears already forming in her eyes. "Please don't be angry. This is my fault. I know I've been difficult lately. I've been having nightmares. I shake when I'm alone. I don't want to cause problems between you two." She looked toward the guest room. "I can sleep anywhere. I don't mind. You can still let your friend stay." I looked at the room behind her. Then I smiled. A real smile, but not a happy one. I grabbed the ruined sheets, the stuffed bear, and the stained pajama top. I carried everything outside. Lily watched in disbelief. Chloe. I needed those things. I didn't answer. I walked downstairs and threw them into the building's dumpster. When I returned, Lily was standing there with tears running down her face. If you don't want me here, you could have just said so, she whispered. You didn't have to humiliate me. Then she turned and ran out. The old me would have immediately felt guilty. I would have chased after her. I would have apologized even if I had done nothing wrong. But I didn't move. Elias looked at me with disappointment. She changed medication recently. She's not stable. What if something happens because of this? His words were almost exactly what I expected. Somehow, Lily's feelings always became my responsibility. If you didn't want her here, you should have told me, he continued. I could have booked her a hotel. You didn't need to attack her. I looked at him quietly. This is our apartment, Elias. Don't you think you should have asked before inviting someone to live here? He frowned as if I had asked something unreasonable. She's having a mental health crisis. And your biggest concern is that I didn't consult you? She's only staying a few days. Is that really something we need to discuss? I almost smiled. Because I remembered his exact words from before. You don't need to ask me about everything. Make your own decisions. When I wanted to change jobs, he said it was my life and my choice. When I needed emotional support, he told me to be independent. When Lily needed anything, he moved mountains. So I simply nodded. You're right. It's not something we need to discuss. He relaxed, thinking the argument was over. He didn't understand what I actually meant. Because if he didn't need to discuss temporary arrangements in our home, then I didn't need to discuss permanent changes in my life. Moving to New York. Ending our relationship. Leaving everything behind. Those decisions belonged to me. That night, I prepared the guest room again. The proper sheets. A clean towel. A glass of water beside the bed. I texted Sarah that everything was ready and told her not to worry. Elias left to check on Lily. I listened to the apartment door close behind him and realized I felt nothing. No jealousy. No anger. No urge to call him back. I sat on our bed and opened the Notes app on my phone. I created a list. Things to cancel. Things to transfer. Things to return. It started small but quickly became longer. My New York transfer had already been approved. The apartment I found in Brooklyn was already leased. I had quietly arranged everything over the past month. No announcement. No asking permission. No waiting for him to notice. I turned off the light and slept peacefully for the first time in a long time. The next morning, Sarah arrived carrying 2 bags and immediately understood something was different. She looked around the apartment, then looked at me. She didn't ask questions. She never forced me to explain pain before I was ready. Instead, she placed a box on the kitchen counter. I brought pastries from that little bakery you like, she said. And I drove past 3 coffee shops because I wanted the exact one. I laughed. Then she hugged me. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to be comforted without wondering if I was asking for too much. How are you feeling? She asked. Surgery is in 4 hours. Fine, I answered. And this time, I meant it. She looked around the apartment again. He put someone in the guest room, didn't he? I nodded. My silk top was ruined. Sarah sighed softly. The birthday one? Yeah. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Chloe, what do you need today? I thought about it. The old me would have said, I need Elias to care. But that version of me was gone. I need you to come to the hospital and bring those ridiculous magazines you always read. She smiled. Already packed. At 11:15, Elias texted me. Your surgery is at 1, right? I'll try to make it. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I placed my phone face down and got into Sarah's car. I didn't ask what try meant anymore. I didn't wonder if I was important enough. The surgery lasted 2 hours. When I woke up, Sarah was there. She held my water, fixed my blanket, complained about the hospital food, and made me laugh when I was still dizzy from anesthesia. She was there because she wanted to be. Not because I begged. Not because I had to prove I deserved care. Just because she loved me. At 3:47, Elias finally appeared in the doorway. He looked around the room. He saw Sarah beside me, the magazines on the bed, the empty cup she had already refilled twice. And then he looked at me. I met his eyes. My voice was still weak from the medication, but my words were clear. It's handled. Don't worry. I watched him recognize the sentence. I watched him realize that I had become the person he always told me to be. He sat down quietly. For 20 minutes, he tried to talk. He asked about the procedure, recovery time, medical details. Questions with clear answers. Questions he knew how to handle. But when Sarah returned with tea, he stood up. I should go, he said. Lily had a difficult afternoon. Of course she did. I simply nodded. Sure. He hesitated. Text me when you get home. For a second, I almost asked, which home? But I didn't. Because I already knew the answer. And so did he. I watched him leave. Then Sarah sat beside me again and opened her magazine. Without looking up, she said, whenever you're ready to talk about New York, I'm here. I smiled slightly. Thursday. I'll help you pack. And just like that, the future I had been afraid to imagine started becoming real. I wasn't losing my life. I was finally choosing one. The days after my surgery passed in a strange kind of silence. Not the painful silence I had become used to with Elias, the kind where I constantly wondered what I had done wrong or what I needed to change to make him notice me again. This silence was different. It was peaceful. It was the silence of someone who had finally made a decision and no longer needed to argue with herself. The uncertainty was gone. All that remained were the details of rebuilding my life. Elias noticed the change before he understood it. I could see it in the way he watched me from across the room sometimes. He wasn't looking at me with affection or concern. He was looking at me like someone who had walked into a familiar room and suddenly realized the furniture had been moved. Something was different, but he couldn't figure out what. I stopped sending him random messages throughout the day. I stopped telling him about small things at work, the funny story a coworker shared, the new recipe I wanted to try, the show I thought he might enjoy. I stopped waiting for his reaction. I stopped needing him to validate every little part of my life. When I picked up my medication after surgery, I didn't tell him. When my manager called about the New York transfer, I didn't mention it. When I stayed late at work finishing projects, I didn't send him a message explaining where I was. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to punish him. I simply stopped doing things for someone who had already stopped making space for me. One evening, we were eating dinner when Lily called. Elias immediately stood up and walked toward the balcony. A few minutes later, his phone rang again. This time, he stepped into the hallway to answer. When he returned, he looked at me carefully. Almost like he was waiting for jealousy, anger, or some kind of reaction. But I just continued eating. And somehow, my lack of response bothered him more than any argument ever had. On the 9th day after my surgery, Elias sat on the edge of the bed while I packed books into boxes. He watched me for a while before speaking. You seem different. I looked up. Do I? Yes. He hesitated. You're not telling me things anymore. I placed another book into the box. You used to tell me everything. Random things. Things that happened at work. Things you watched. Things you were thinking about. I looked at him. You used to put on headphones whenever I talked. He opened his mouth but didn't say anything. I'm not blaming you, I added. I'm just saying that's what happened. The room became quiet. For once, Elias didn't have an argument ready. Because there wasn't anything to argue about. It wasn't one big betrayal that destroyed us. It was hundreds of small moments where I slowly learned that my feelings were inconvenient. Chloe, he started. I'm tired, Elias. I closed the box. I'm going to sleep. He didn't stop me. And somehow, that told me everything I needed to know. The morning of my 12th day before moving, I woke up early. I made coffee, finished packing the last few boxes, and looked around the apartment one final time. There were still traces of the life I had built there. A candle I loved. A notebook full of old plans. A mug with a chipped handle that belonged to my mother. Small pieces of myself scattered throughout a place where I had spent years trying to fit into someone else's world. I packed everything quietly. At 8 in the morning, the moving service arrived. I left a note on the kitchen counter before walking out. It was only 5 words. I handled it. Don't worry. I didn't leave it to hurt him. I left it because it was the most honest summary of everything that had happened. New York welcomed me with cold November air and streets that never seemed to sleep. I expected to feel lost. I expected loneliness. Starting over in a completely new city should have been terrifying. And it was difficult. But beneath all the fear, there was something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Nobody in New York knew the version of me who constantly apologized for needing attention. Nobody knew the woman who waited by the phone hoping someone would finally choose her. Here, I could simply exist. I could make decisions without explaining them. I could enjoy things without asking if someone else approved. My apartment in Brooklyn was small, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every little detail was chosen because I loved it. Not because I was trying to create a place someone else would enjoy. Sarah's wedding was in December. I went alone. Months earlier, I would have spent hours asking Elias what dress I should wear. I would have sent him pictures and waited for his opinion. Instead, I chose the dress myself. I walked into that wedding feeling lighter than I had in years. Sarah looked beautiful. When she walked down the aisle, I cried. Not only because she was happy, but because I finally understood what real love looked like. Her husband looked at her like her presence was something precious, not something he had learned to tolerate. During the reception, I danced until my feet hurt. I laughed without checking whether anyone was watching. I went home that night, sat on the floor of my apartment, and cried. But they weren't tears because I missed Elias. They were tears for the woman I used to be. The woman who had spent 4 years shrinking herself so someone else wouldn't feel overwhelmed. The woman who almost sent him a picture of her surgery papers because some part of her still wanted him to care. She deserved compassion. She deserved to be remembered. Then I made tea and went to sleep. A few weeks later, I met Adrian Hayes. It wasn't dramatic. There was no instant spark or movie-like moment. He was simply someone I noticed because he paid attention. He was attending a consultant meeting at my office, completely unrelated to my department. He had a calm confidence about him. Not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that didn't need it. During the meeting, I unconsciously pressed my hand against my side. My surgery recovery was going well, but long meetings still caused discomfort. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Adrian did. During the break, he placed a bottle of water beside me. You're leaning slightly to your left, he said. I thought you might need this. I looked at the bottle. My first instinct was to say, I'm fine. That was what I had learned to say. I had become so used to proving I could handle everything that accepting help felt uncomfortable. But something about him made me stop. "Thank you," I said instead. He simply nodded and returned to his notes. No dramatic concern. No expectation. No attempt to make himself look like a hero. Just a small act of kindness. And somehow, that affected me more than grand gestures ever had. A few weeks later, we both stayed late at the office. The building was almost empty, and for the first time in months, I felt comfortable sitting in silence with someone. I went to the break room to get coffee and accidentally made 2 cups. A habit from another life. A leftover instinct from years of always thinking about someone else. I stood there holding both cups for a moment before placing one beside Adrian. He looked at it, then at me. "Thank you," he said. That was it. No teasing. No questions. No assumption. Just gratitude. We worked quietly for another hour. And I realized something that surprised me. Silence didn't always mean someone was ignoring you. Sometimes silence meant you felt safe enough not to fill it. Adrian slowly became part of my life in the most unexpected way. He remembered small things. My coffee order. The fact that I forgot lunch when I was stressed. The way I liked arriving early before the office became noisy. He never made a big deal about it. Sometimes food would simply appear on my desk. A sandwich when I had been working too long. Dinner from a restaurant near the office when he knew I would stay late. No messages asking if I appreciated it. No expectation that I owed him anything. The first time I said, "You didn't have to do that," he looked at me seriously. "I know." His answer surprised me. "Then why did you?" He looked back at his computer. "Because you're recovering. Because you're adjusting to a new city. Because you worked too hard. And because being capable doesn't mean you should always have to do everything alone." I stood there quietly. Those words stayed with me. Because Elias had spent years teaching me that needing anything made me weak. Adrian showed me that being strong didn't mean refusing kindness. It meant being able to accept it without feeling ashamed. And for the first time in a long time, I started believing that maybe I wasn't too much. Maybe I had just been asking the wrong person. Months passed, and my life in New York slowly became something I never thought I would have. Not perfect. Not without challenges. But mine. Every morning, I woke up in a place I had chosen. Every decision I made belonged to me. I no longer checked my phone hoping for a message from someone who might finally remember I existed. I no longer measured my worth by how much patience I could have for someone else's neglect. I was learning that independence wasn't about proving I didn't need anyone. It was about knowing I would be okay even if someone left. Adrian became part of that new life quietly. He never rushed into my world and never tried to replace what I had lost. He didn't ask me to depend on him. He didn't make himself necessary. He simply showed up. And somehow, that was what made him different. He walked me to the subway after work several times before I even realized it had become a habit. One evening, I finally stopped and looked at him. "You know you don't live this way, right?" I said. "Your apartment is in the opposite direction." He glanced at me with a small smile. "I know." "Then why do you keep walking with me?" He shrugged. "Because I like talking to you." I laughed softly. "You could have just said that." "I could have," he replied. "But I thought showing up was better." That sentence stayed with me. Because for years, I had been surrounded by someone who always had explanations for why he couldn't be there. Adrian never promised anything dramatic. He just appeared. Again and again. Without being asked. Without making me feel like I owed him something. The strangest part was that at first, I didn't know how to accept it. I was so used to fighting for attention that receiving it freely felt suspicious. I kept waiting for the hidden condition. The moment when he would remind me that I was too demanding. The moment when kindness became a debt. But it never came. One afternoon, Adrian brought lunch to my desk because he noticed I had skipped breakfast. "You didn't have to," I said automatically. He looked at me. "I know." That answer made me smile because it was becoming familiar. "You always say that." "Because it's true." He placed the food down. "I'm not helping because you can't handle things. I'm helping because I want to." And for the first time, I understood the difference. Elias had confused my ability to survive without him with proof that I didn't deserve support. Adrian understood that being strong and being cared for could exist together. Then, in February, Elias called. His name appeared on my phone screen, and for the first time, I didn't feel my heart drop. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the desperate urge to hear him say he had finally understood. I just looked at the name of someone who had once been my entire world and realized he was now only a memory. I answered. "Hey." There was a long pause. "Chloe?" "Yes." "How are you?" I looked around my apartment. At the books on my shelf. The coffee beside me. The life I had created. "Good," I said. And this time, it was completely true. Another pause. "I'm in New York for a conference." I waited. I was wondering if maybe we could meet. Have coffee. I agreed. Not because I wanted him back. Not because I needed closure. I agreed because I was no longer afraid of that chapter of my life. We met at a small cafe near his hotel. Elias was already there when I arrived. He stood up when he saw me, and I noticed the expression on his face. It was the look of someone seeing a person they thought they knew, only to realize that person had changed completely. I was wearing a green coat I had bought because I loved the color. My hair was shorter because I wanted it that way. I looked rested. I looked like myself. "You look," he stopped. "Different." I smiled slightly. "I think that's the point." He sat down. For a moment, he just looked at me. I wanted to apologize. I stayed quiet. "I've thought about everything I said to you. About how I told you to be independent. How I said you relied on me too much." He lowered his eyes. "And then you actually did it. You became independent. You left. And I realized something." He swallowed. "I spent years teaching you how to live without me. Then I was surprised when you did." I looked at him carefully. "You believed everything you said, Elias." He looked up. "What?" "That was the hardest part. You weren't pretending. You really thought I was too much. You really thought I asked for too much. You only understood after I stopped asking." He was silent. Because there was nothing he could say to change that. "Lily and I ended things," he finally said. "The situation was complicated. I realized he stopped. I was wrong." I nodded. "Maybe you were. She wasn't what I thought she was." I looked away. "That doesn't matter anymore." He studied my face. "Is there someone else?" I thought about Adrian. About the way he noticed things without making me feel watched. About the way he helped without making me feel helpless. About how peaceful it felt to be around someone who didn't need me to become smaller. "That's not the question you should ask," I said. Elias looked confused. "Then what is?" I smiled softly. "The question is whether I'm happy." I paused. "And I am." He looked down at his coffee. "I miss you." Those words would have destroyed me once. They would have made me wonder if I should return. But now they only sounded like a truth from someone living in the past. "I know," I said gently. "But missing someone doesn't always mean you should get them back." He looked at me. Do you think we could ever try again? I thought about the girl I used to be. The girl who begged for attention. The girl who waited for him to choose her. No, I answered honestly. Because I don't want the life I had before. He nodded slowly. There was sadness in his eyes, but also acceptance. When we left the cafe, he stood outside for a moment in the cold. I hope you're happy, Chloe. I smiled. I am. Then I walked away. And this time, I didn't look back. Not because I wanted to prove anything. Not because I wanted him to see me leave. I simply had nothing left to return to. That evening, Adrian and I had dinner together. It wasn't officially a date. It had started as something simple, two coworkers sharing a meal after long days, but over time it became our tradition. When I arrived, he stood and pulled out my chair like he always did. Not because he thought I couldn't do it myself. Just because he wanted to. And I had finally learned that there was a difference. Long day, he asked. Medium, I replied, smiling. We ordered dinner and talked about everything and nothing. Then I told him about seeing Elias. He listened quietly. How was it? He asked. I thought about it. Finished. He nodded. The right kind of finished? I smiled. Yes. The kind where you close a door and don't feel the need to keep checking if it's locked. Adrian smiled. Good. And that was enough. No pressure. No dramatic speech. Just understanding. Months later, on a warm Sunday in May, Adrian and I walked home from the farmer's market. He carried the heavier bag without saying anything. He just took it from my hand naturally. I looked at him and smiled. You know, that thing you said before. About helping me not because I couldn't do something, but because I shouldn't always have to do everything alone. He looked at me. Yeah? I think about that a lot. We walked a few more steps. For years, I thought needing anything made me weak. I thought if I wanted less, asked for less, and took up less space, people would stay. Adrian listened quietly. Then you came along and reminded me that someone choosing to help me doesn't mean I'm incapable. He squeezed my hand. You were never too much, Chloe. I looked at him. I know that now. And I meant it. Because I finally understood something Elias never did. Love isn't about finding someone who needs you. It's about finding someone who chooses you. Not because you are helpless. Not because you begged. Not because you earned it. Simply because they want to. Elias taught me how to survive on my own. New York taught me how to become myself again. And Adrian showed me that being strong didn't mean carrying everything alone. Sometimes the greatest strength is allowing someone to stand beside you. I spent years waiting for someone to notice that I had stopped asking. But by the time Elias realized I no longer needed him to choose me, I had already chosen myself. And that was the moment my life truly began.